Hi, my name is Ingrid. I'm a professor in the Studio Arts and MFA at Concordia University, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome you all tonight. I'm afraid we're full and we can't sit in the aisles. It's a fire hazard, so my apologies. We do post every lecture on YouTube, so you can see them. And it gives me great pleasure to welcome all of you to tonight's lecture, part of the Conversations in Contemporary Art series sponsored by the MFA and Studio Arts Department of Concordia University. It gives me especially great pleasure today to introduce a really valued colleague and friend, Janet Werner, who really almost needs no introduction, so mine will be very short. But Janet Werner was born in Winnipeg and lives and works here in Montreal, where she also teaches in the painting department here in the Department of Studio Arts. She holds an MFA from Yale University and a BFA from the Maryland Institute College of Art. And Janet has shown widely, nationally and internationally, including solo shows at the Art Gallery of Windsor, the Sadie Bronfman Center Gallery, Montreal, the Contemporary Art Gallery of Vancouver, the Mendel Art, the Ottawa Art Gallery. Internationally, her work has been featured in solo exhibitions in Cape Town, South Africa, and Cologne, Germany. And her work was recently included in the survey exhibition O Canada at Mass MoCA. It really is too long, so I won't go any further, except to say that please join me in extending a really warm welcome to Janet.
Thanks, Ingrid. It really is too long. And my talk is really probably too long, but I'm going to go very quickly. I want to start by showing some images of other people's work that somehow informs my work. I'm starting with my friend, fellow presenter, the Gopher, and I just like to start with him because I know you've been looking at him for a long time, so I'm going to move quickly, but he is presenting himself in a similar manner to many of the images I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you only works from the portraits that I've been working on for the last 17 years or so, and they all share this aspect of the encounter. So this one-on-one encounter with a single other being, usually not an animal, usually a human. But as I said, I'm going to show you a bunch of other images first, quickly, just to give you some different angles, ideas about how I think about, what is interesting to me about the face. And I think one of the first things that is interesting is the fact that we are always seeing things as faces, as evidenced in this image, which I stole from an artist whose name I don't remember because it was so long ago now. But very, very quickly, we are prepared to see things as faces, not only to see them as faces, but also to read expression into those faces. You probably recognize this Julian Opie image, which is a still, I believe, from a video, which I don't have to illustrate the actual movement of the face. But what's interesting about it is how minimal the information is, and how even with such minimal amount of information, we are still reading for expression. And in the video, actually, there is a subtle, slow movement and change of expression. You might have seen it. It was shown, I think, at Persian Laundry a couple of years ago. Is the sound good?
Yes.
Yes? Okay. This is a photograph of Jürgen Teller, one of my favorite fashion photographers, and photographers, a portrait of him and his son. And you can see immediately an obvious family resemblance. But what's I guess partly interesting is the real stark contrast in the nature of the gaze that you see with a baby with a sort of completely out of control, probably because of a flash, but nonetheless, babies are creatures we can stare at, and they can stare back, and you don't have to break the look. You can continue to stare at them. Babies and animals, once you reach adulthood or even adolescence, you can no longer stare at people anymore, unless it's a painting, a still image. So, did I touch on it? I think I did. Renuka Dykstra, one of my favorite photographers, partly because of the way in which the gaze of the characters seems so vulnerable, I suppose. And in this particular image, you see 4 very different characters at a particular age, adolescence, when they're starting to form very strong attitudes, dispositions. The nature of the pose is very evident, and they're sort of each extremely different, very, very distinct from each other as you look at them. In contrast to this situation where you have a pair of twins, on the left, Diane Arbus's photograph of twins, the same twins shown on the right, grown up, holding their portrait. And the uncanny nature of doubling, when you see the same person twice, and how we're so used to scanning for what's individual that when you see twins, it's like you can't quite grasp what's going on, but we still are scanning for difference. This is a pair of images called Beauty 1 and Beauty 2 by Nancy Burson, who is a pioneer of digital photography before personal computers existed, really. On the left is Beauty 1, which is a composite image of 5 actresses from the 50s. On the right, and I can tell you who they are actually, because this is the one thing I did write down. Betty Davis, Audrey Hepburn, Grace Kelly, Sophie Loren, and Marilyn Monroe on the left. On the right is Jane Fonda, Jacqueline Bisset, Diane Keaton, Brooke Shields, and Meryl Streep, and from the 80s. So you can actually see these ideals of beauty, the contrast between them, this sort of culturally specific aspect of them being rooted in a specific time. But for me, what's also interesting about it is the idea of, if you overlay these images of beauty, what does it make conceptually? Is it more beautiful? Cindy Sherman is someone whose work I've come to identify with more and more strongly, simply because over the course of her lifetime, she's continued to manifest so many different images in various disguises or masquerades, and in some ways, I think I identify with her project. Michael Jackson, the idea of transformation, personal transformation, in his case, actual physical transformation, is quite a remarkable thing that he did, that I often think, like, if he was in the art world, he would be someone who was really highly esteemed, but because he was in the pop world, he became sort of a joke. And the idea of different types of representation and how they can affect the expression, I mean, especially in painting, different languages of representation. So the very more naturalistic portrait of Olga on the left, contrasting with, I think it's Dora Maar on the right, the Cubist influenced portrait, which I believe also has a kind of reflective aspect to it, but in a completely different style of representation. So that's something that's really consistently interesting to me. And the idea of the cartoon or the caricature, and how a very abbreviated statement can become more expressive than a naturalistic representation, for example. Or the alteration, this is Otto Dix, just a detail from the painting, but the alteration of color in painting, how that can affect the expression, and obviously this is also a caricature as well. Philip Guston, reducing the form just to an eye, that sort of expressionist emphasis is sort of very interesting. And so I guess I'm just trying to sort of shift around and focus, like throw some different angles on all the different kinds of questions that I think about in the portraits. And Alex Cass has been a really always sort of stands as a big figure for me, because of the reduction and simplicity and ultra clean, decisive beauty and awkwardness at the same time, that somehow he manages to do both things. John Curran, obviously a really important influence just in terms of, well, being a pioneer in terms of the whole, if I can call it a genre of the fictional portrait. But in this particular instance, I like the idea of embodying, going in two different directions at the same time, and how can you use just the figure to embody ideas. Mixing art historical and contemporary signs in the portrait is interesting. And this portrait by Goya of the Duchess of Alba, in which her hair is so incredibly enormous, I realized today, I mean, I've been looking at this image for a long time, but I realized it's probably, or could be, a wig. Does anyone know if it's a wig? Because I tried to paint the painting after this image, and I couldn't get the hair big enough. It was, it was never big enough. Maybe it's a wig. Anyways, you know, there's this kind of eloquent beauty, harmony with the color, but then it's very funny painting. Everything wrapped up with a bow like that. And the conundrum of not being able to see the face, which is what we really want to see always, is like, okay, how do we read the meaning? How do we read who's facing us in terms of their expression and what they need from us, what they want from us? So this image of, like, you know, the bouquet that's actually covering the most salient part of the picture is, I find, quite humorous. It's Magritte. And one of the biggest influences for me, as you'll see, is fashion, world fashion photography, fashion designers in this case. This is a Philip Tracy hat that went with an Alexander McQueen show, and he seems to have become a really important influence for me. And even though I know nothing about fashion, and I study it constantly. Okay, finally, Kondo, distortion, exaggeration. What does that do? How does that affect the expression? And if you have one pair of two lips, what does that do? What does that mean? Do they speak differently? Is there different, are different things going to come out? I really love the inventiveness of altering the body. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about my work, and I'm going to go back to 1997, which was when I started doing the invented portraits. And what preceded this was 10 years of working abstractly and with biomorphic abstract shapes floating in fields, and often a single shape that was morphing or turning or twisting. And I'm sorry, I don't have any documentation to show you, so I'm just starting arbitrarily with this first invented portrait, and it's one of the few male figures you'll see, so enjoy it. He's sort of called the alien because he came from nowhere. Or, I don't know where he came from. What happened was I was doing a lot of floating balls, basically. Balls. And if you have floating balls, they really want to configure to form a face. You have to work really hard to make them not configure to form a face. And I went on a residency, and I did some drawing, and they formed a face, and I said, okay. And what, and then it was staring at me, and that was sort of the beginning of looking at faces. And what happened was they were formed from very, very primal, basic shapes, but the minute I put a neck and shoulders on, it became a portrait. So it was very accidental that they led into portraiture. The first ones, like this one, you can see through the skin. It's sort of got a lot of sort of markings and movement underneath. they were, as I said, they were made really from imagination, but also from memory of specific people that I would see, actual people, or things I would remember. So this character called Longface, she was a secondary character in the film called, I think it was Secrets and Lies. And she was like the sister-in-law. She was like not the protagonist, but she was always in the background, and she was always sort of angry. And I thought of all of these characters as secondary characters, not the protagonists, not the pretty ones, not the main event. And they were all very sort of bald, like just mug shots, just kind of staring at you, and somewhat androgynous, as in this case. Could be seen as a male or a female figure. The color became, what usually happens is I draw, and in developing something, and then the color starts to become more and more important as part of the expression of the image. So the background, even though it's empty, sort of empty, that color is supposed to emanate some kind of meaning. They were also caricatures to a degree, and what interests me about caricature is that it's more expressive. You exaggerate certain features, and that allows them to, for effect and emphasis, to be more well, you have to dramatize the expression. So, but in order for it to not be a cartoon, which I feel is something that you would glide over, the layering process has to invest the image with more depth. So one of the things that always interests me is how can you do something that's a bit outlandish, but actually make it have a resonance and a sense of reality to it. So even though they're invented, I want them to feel like they're actually real beings. As I said, there's this layering process, and so one of the things that interests me also was the idea that you could have the sense of a different history, that the figure has a past and some kind of personal history. So different palettes combining, like the eyes are one type of palette, and then the flesh is a different palette. Or in this case, and there's also an expansion and contraction of the proportions of the figure, which is something that recurs later, but in this earlier series of portraits, it was there in the beginning. It started out as a girl, and then it became a boy. Certain features would be emphasized through the color, like this one is called Rubber Lips because of the blue lips. And they all had this sort of I think, René, you called them the forlorn figures. And I thought of them, they seem to have a kind of traumatic thing in common that had happened that was never narrated, actually. This one is based on Donatello Versace's hair. And the fun thing about making these was that they all would start in a very similar way, just a very simple armature, like a circle with, like, you know, a can and shoulders, and then get layered, and I would keep going until they came into seem like they had an identity that was specific. So it was sort of like modeling in clay, almost. This is probably the ugliest painting I'm going to show you, called Green Man. And there was a woman, I was living in Saskatoon at the time when I made these, and there was a woman who lived there who said, "You painted me," when she saw this painting. And I was really touched by that. Like, she identified with it, and I guess that's something that I want people to experience an actual sense of identification with them, and I'm always disappointed when I get the comment, which does sometimes happen, "Oh, they're all wearing masks." I'm like, no, that's real emotion. yeah, this was a very risque one for me because it went down, like, and she's wearing one of those skating costumes that's skin colored. And this is Pink Boy with he's quite big. So that's the other thing that happens is they start small and they get bigger. Like when they get bigger, they get more colorful. The space around them, which is also something that is important in my current paintings. I sort of identify it with the prairies. It's where I'm from. It's the landscape I identify with, and that sense of space, which is like oxygen to me, is something that I play a lot with the figures. There's never any, or not never, but there's rarely, and not in this series anyways, there was nothing else in the background, just color, the figures, and you looking at them. Okay, then in 1999, yeah, then in 1999, so that was like just 3 years, I guess, what I showed you. 3 years. And then I moved to Montreal in 1999, and everything changed. As you can imagine, moving from Saskatoon to Montreal, everything changes. And one of the things that changed was the people and fashion. And I felt I had exhausted what I was doing. That all those characters were reaching a similar place, and I didn't really know how to continue, or how to go deeper, or how to add or change what I was doing. So I felt I needed to refer to some secondary source material, and I went with what was most readily available, which was photographs, which was a completely taboo when I was training as a student. I was like really against the rules to use photographs. So I had held off for many years, but I didn't want to have real people, because that didn't make any sense to me. And so I wanted more anonymous figures, like the anonymous figures that I was already painting. So I was looking at magazines, and in Saskatoon at that time, I don't know if we had these big magazine stores that are filled with hundreds of magazines. I don't remember them in any case. And when I arrived here, and then you go into these magazine stores, and it's just like this flood of images. And so it was kind of like being a kid in a candy store, and I was just looking at all these magazines. And anyways, point is, I started using secondary sources, photographs, and you can see immediately when you look at this image that there is a light source, and that she's wearing lipstick, and she's got a hairdo that's more specific. So one of my favorite references was hairdressing magazines, because the models are not as, like the secondary models. They're not like the top models, or the secondary models. And very often there would be these strange things going on with the hair, like this, which I saw kind of as dog ears. And but again, you can see here that the light is very is articulated in a way that I did not imagine. It was actually, the colors of the photographs. And so I allowed myself to be seduced utterly by the beauty of the photograph, the beauty of the model that was represented. And I wanted to see what would happen. Like, what if you did this thing that you're not supposed to do? Using photographs, bring pretty women, like, what would happen? And also, I was starving for beauty, because I lost my space, my landscape, and I was all destabilized. So the fact of having something to hold on to look at, somehow I feel had some kind of significance. Anyways, so these are the beauties that followed the forlorn figures, and what kind of interested me also about them was the fact that there was this exaggeration, like her lips are like, mega lips and like mega red. So there is this exaggeration going on there as well. Yeah, there's another boy. There are only going to be 3 men in this presentation. That was number 2. And so I allowed myself to be seduced. I was quite fascinated actually because the amount of choreography and lighting, and I mean, I'm sure we have photographers here who know, they're so constructed, they're so carefully constructed, and so fascinating in terms of their strangeness. Not just that they're beautiful, but that they're strange, and very often you don't know what the narrative is and you don't know what they're selling. And so I just became fascinated with that material. And I got to hang these paintings in the Canadian Embassy in Berlin, so I have to show you this image. These are some of my models. And as you can see, they have a kind of, there's a similarity. They almost look like, you know, the same doll, like person, and they, what appealed to me about using them was that you could use them as like a generic, like a cipher that you could project, you know, what you wanted to onto, so this is a studio shot of my, like, what, the chaos of my studio, what I became also really fascinated with is the extreme fashion. I mentioned Alexander McQueen and the sort of the disruption of the body. Clothes that are not really clothes, but are more like apparatuses that change the body or make us look at it differently. And I was talking to my students today about some of their paintings where the face was occluded, just so happened, and they were fascinated with it precisely because of, you know, what you couldn't see. So it's playing with what's visible, what's invisible. Here's another example of Alexander McQueen, where, you know, it's just like this explosion of color and texture, and the body, you know, is there, but you can't see it. Extreme hairstyles. This is by an artist, actually. And blondes. A lot of blondes. And Paris, specifically, who is kind of a cartoon, right? But she's got that, there's something about the blue of her eyes and the blonde of her hair that is kind of mesmerizing. I mean, here it's kind of cartoonish and silly, but I like silly things. I think that's good. So then the problem of the copying of the photograph, and what was also true, though I was really seduced by the photograph, was that I never really was able to get what I wanted from it, because a photograph and a painting are not the same thing, they're different. And so what does a painting do, the photograph? What is in the photograph that you want, that you can't have because you're making a painting? So one of those things for me was an idea about, like, what I saw in this photograph on the left was a kind of innocence. But when I painted it, this is the second version I did of it, it didn't look like, it didn't have that quality. So I painted it again and exaggerated and let the paint do more to try to exaggerate those qualities. And I also started trying to, exaggerate and play with different ideas about sweetness. I'm going to have a little detour here for some sweetness, over sweetness, let's say. This is actually Christina Ricci, who I used a few times. She lends herself so well because her head is not here because she lost weight, but her head is really usually very round. I don't know if you know her round head period, but she has an extremely round head, like a doll. And anyways. But what I started doing was collaging different backgrounds into the image. This is a very, very busy painting for me. And it doesn't last long, these backgrounds. But so paint by numbers background, sliding into, because I started wanting to try to, first of all, I was bothered by the copyright issue. I felt like I was stealing, really, photographers' work, and that wasn't okay. but also I wanted to do something that was more fun and more interesting. So I started using the paint by numbers backgrounds because I didn't want to introduce photographic landscapes. I wanted to see what would happen. A lot of these things are, let's see what would happen if, and some of them work better than others, obviously. But so one side of the painting is one background, the other side is a different background. And I let it get complicated for a while. It's not really, and I started also being more interested in the clothing and sort of the masquerade, the aspect of what are they wearing and how can that enter into the sort of expression of it. The kittens, I couldn't not put these kittens in. I had them at the beginning and the end, and then I just put them in the middle. because the kittens, well, it's a double portrait, and I wanted you to not always feel that it's so lonely. But again, it's that sort of prairie space, big landscape. Art gallery Wednesday. And then I started or decided to, instead of putting collage in the background, sliding in a different kind of background, to actually start disrupting the figure itself and start an argument or a conversation inside the figure. And so in a funny way, going back to what I was doing in the first invented portraits, where the heads could be big and the bodies could be small, and how does that affect the expression? And so there's a lot of expansion and contraction that happens in these ones. This was such a difficult painting. What can I tell you about this one? Oh yeah, so she, there's often a quality of vulnerability that I sort of end up wanting. I want to be able to identify with these characters, and if I make someone that I can't identify with, I tend to continue or change. They go through a lot of transformation until I can accept them. So she had many heads, many failed heads, and many different kinds of bathing suits. And the gesture, is the bathing suit coming on or going off? What is your relationship to her? Is it, she's huge. This is a big painting. I don't have a way of showing you the scale of it, but your eye level would be maybe at your belly button. So it's bigger than you, but she looks like she's doing something that she doesn't want to. So it's complicated. And the bear painting, he had many heads. She also, for a long time, it was a female character, and couldn't resolve it, and then the animal head, which is actually a ceramic bear head, seemed to do what was required. I like masking the face because that introduces another level of not knowing who's under it, not knowing if just leave it like that. This one is called Ohio, and partly because of the big sky in the background. And for me, I think also I wanted to mention that color as a trigger. I look for hours on images and images and images and images, and very often there won't be anything that. And I say to myself, it's not in there. You're not going to find it. It's not there. But then something does trigger an idea, and often it's just color itself. And so for me in this painting, that particular blonde, with that particular flesh color, with that particular sky that's sort of anemic, with that particular, black and white, in combination produces meaning, you know, that is really coming through formal qualities. So it's a lot of it is very formal in terms of when the expression is what I find, you know, satisfying. In this case, it has a lot to do with the blue of the background, and I meant to say, even though there's no action or narrative in the background, the color and the layering of the color, even if it's one color or it looks like one color, it's like many layers, so that blue has an energy that's as important as the character. This is called My Lender. Some people will appreciate that title. It's the neighborhood, my neighborhood. And we have a lot of, you know, very interesting fashions and yeah. Interesting thing about the heads and the size of the heads, like someone said to me, because I showed these heads, or rather this series, with the big heads and the small heads together, and there was different reactions to the big heads and the small heads, and you know, some people were kind of afraid of the ones with the smaller heads, and I think that's really super interesting. This one, I was really interested in the devouring of the figure with the flowers, the idea that something good could become something not good if it was, you know, too much. And she also has a, you know, very 60s kind of hairdo and makeup, and she's got bloodshot eyes too. I'm not scared. So this is a source, an example of a source. This was a lucky day, a good day, when I looked in a magazine and I saw her, and I thought, not only did I see her, but I saw what it should be instead. And I was actually able to paint it, and that almost never happens. So this one is, you know, it's a pretty quick painting. Sometimes they go on and on and on, and sometimes they go quickly and easily, which is rare, but usually a happier occasion. This one is called Happy. And she's one of very few who shows her teeth. And it was a response to a dare to do why don't you do a smiling, happy person? And I really tried to but she's, you know, anyway. A lot of blondes, as I mentioned. The blonde, I think, for me is like the very iconic, you know, as a dark-haired woman, like the blonde is always like the inaccessible. Oh yeah, so costuming, playing with costuming, and accessories a little bit, very little. But you know, this one, obviously, I was really interested in the size of the head in relation to the handbag. But that's true, that's what it is. Like when you look at the magazines, they're like that. And then I was also interested in the exquisite corpse idea, where, you know, one part of the body could be doing one thing, and then the middle section is doing a different thing, and the top section is doing a different thing. So in the big painting, you know, she's very placid and composed and normal, and then something strange in my imagination is happening. Is it in the pattern and underneath the pattern? She's very stretched, very elongated, and you don't know, you know, anything could happen in there. And then the strange glove with the flaccid flower at the bottom. So I kind of like the idea that you could read a narrative of some kind into a single figure painting. And the one on the left was painted after the one on the right, and I kind of like it better. It sort of gets that idea across more effectively, more efficiently, perhaps. And it's just fresher and faster. So this is the one where I tried to do the big hair. And those, so that's after Goya, and the marshmallow ghosts are from Martha Stewart Halloween magazine. This one was really a trial. Started out completely not like this at all. I don't have the other images to show you, but what I was really interested in was the knees up. Yeah, that was the whole premise of this painting, knees up, and over to the side, off to the side. And so she went through many transformations. The whole thing was purple at one point, and there were butterflies, and anyway, so she ended up like this, and the eye patch was based on a patterning of a dog, and the blue lips were just necessary, because what happens often when I start is that I start with a mistake, which is something I actually look at, like so let's just say a pretty girl in a magazine, and I start and I paint that, and immediately it's like it's no good, you know. And how are you gonna give it character or life, make it interesting? And you know, a lot of operations might have to happen. I kind of like the idea that she's straining to see something, but she's either blind or has sunglasses and can't see. So it's kind of like a contradiction. I like the idea of trying to embody a contradiction in the figure somehow. And this painting, which is called Folding Woman, is actually Nicole Kidman. And it was from an article called Who's Afraid of Nicole Kidman? And accidentally, the page got folded exactly like this. And I had it on my studio wall for a really long time, and I just thought, that can't be a painting. And then, you know, one day, a year or two later, I thought, I'm just gonna paint it. And it's like, it's the painting that most people like the best of anything I've ever done, practically. I don't know why, but anyways, like I said, it's fascinating when you can't see. It's like what you can't see and what you can see that's always at play. So I tried another one, and this one called DeMille, for no good reason. I thought it would be interesting if it had something coming out of the fold as well. So flowers. There's Paris Hilton. And this one, which is a little more expressionist in style. And I've been using the same sort of motif for a really long time, but my so-called style is sort of like always multiple. I don't have like one way of making the paintings, and I worry about that, but I accept now that these things should coexist. You should be allowed to do more than one kind of thing, and especially because they inform each other. You know, in this case, the splits, like it's like you see through this figure, there's something going on. There's a lot of activity, including a mouse, and other things that you can't name. And I really sort of want the paintings to represent things that you can't name, but you know are there. So to make them visible somehow. Figure from the back, which, you know, is always mysterious because, well, for obvious reasons, you just wait for them to turn around. This one I think was inspired by Alexander McQueen also. It's called Smear Case, and I was trying to create movement, because one of the things that you don't have when you have a figure in the center of an image all the time without anything other than narrative props is you don't have a lot of movement. So one of the ways here, the hair is obviously moving and she's turning, but and I don't know if you can see there's movement in the brushwork, so that becomes a really important way of making something happen, the sensation of movement. Yes. That's my time. Okay. hard time with this one. Yeah. So there really, there's a lot of experimentation, and yeah, constantly trying to reinvent this single image or motif. This one's smiling too, actually. And she has many eyes on the back of her head. Oh, another boy. And this one started out, I showed you earlier that image from the Beauties series. This one was based on the same image, and I thought it could be interesting to go back and try approaching her again. I don't know if you remember her. She was in profile. She was blonde, and she had whipped hair. Anyways, yeah, I don't know what to say about this one, really. It's called Belle, but she's got a problem. Another kind of interesting thing that I thought would be good to explore, which I haven't explored that much, is the idea of pictures within pictures. So in this case, she has a scarf that has an image on it, and it's like a way of introducing another image into the image, and also the floating pattern in the background, which is kind of disease-like. And the veils, the idea of veils, veils over the face. This was an assignment my boyfriend gave me to make a sparkly person. And I tried to make a sparkly person, but this is what happened instead. But I like the idea that you could see inside the person, and also there's the minimal indication of actually an interior space. She's cartoon. This goes back to the idea of the cartoon that actually has, I hope, some real feeling. Like when you look at it, that you should really actually feel something. And this one is called Zero Eyes. This was a very, very long, drawn-out painting, which took a long time to resolve itself. I don't know how to explain that, actually, but yeah. Oh, another double portrait. This is a double portrait of my sister and I. And we both had a really trying year last year for different reasons. And so I painted us. And she's the pretty one. She's the blonde pretty one. I thought I found this image on someone's website about mounds. And I thought, that's so interesting. And then I thought, all of my portraits are mounds. They all come up from the bottom, and there's just shoulders and a head, and they all just like that, they're just all mounds. And I thought that was really fun. So I followed that one with this one, with that double portrait again, sisters. And we're getting to the end. This is a shot in my studio of some of the paintings. You can get a sense of their scale. I struggle a lot with the larger scale, but I feel like it's very important that they have this scale in order to have a presence that's commanding. And unfortunately, I lost the cat. I know, it's really sad.
Because don't they look good together? This is the aging ballerina. Oh, and maybe, yeah, my only nude, really. Or is she naked or is she nude? Or is it her body at all? Like, I feel like she's wearing her breasts. And also, I feel like the breasts are eyes that are kind of looking at each other. She's very shy. I brought a few images so you can see some of the process of transformation. So this painting, which took a very long time to make, because it changed so often, and I only have a few of the images to show you that I just happened to take in the process. She started out crouching down, and I don't have an image of that. This is how she ended up, okay, and then this was a stage she went through because she was too pretty, and I wanted her to have more, power, and so she got like this, and then she got pretty again, and that was not good either. And so she ended up like this, and I call her the dreamer, because she's a painter, and I think for me it is a dream, kind of a dreaming thing. This is the Stalker. She's pregnant. She's actually John Curran's wife. But we're not going to talk about that. And this was an installation of that work that you saw at Parisian Laundry, 2012. And this is called Earthling, which was the name of the show. Titles are really hard for me, and the Earthling, the idea was that, they're human, or are they? That they're vulnerable. I can't explain that right now, because my time is up. And this is an installation at UCAM, which I was happy to experiment with the idea of installing a bunch of paintings together, in a row like this, so that you could get the sense of it's the same thing turning and changing and transforming and becoming different things. Or, it's nice to see them together because you get the sense that they're all like a family, that they're all kind of working together. And exploring similar things in different ways. So this is my last image, and this was at the Esker Foundation in Calgary, which is a gorgeous space, and it was really a privilege to be able to see the paintings sort of together, moving through the space, and how they interact when you get to see them, together as a community. I think that's my last image. So I did the timing, and we're 6:56. Thank you.
Right up to some questions.
Do you think about breaking your own rules?
Yes, I do. Yes, I can. mean, yeah, like I'm not allowed to do a nude person, a naked person with boobs. And I broke that rule because I wanted to see what would happen. Like usually, I mean, a lot of them are experiments about what if I do this, what if I do that. So for me, they really, yeah, it's not a rule, but yeah, I do. I think so. I'm not answering your question. I'm sorry.
Any other questions?
Yeah. I've seen that you've got like few double portraits. Is it something that you're like wanting to do more, like double or even triple, like massive, like the massive people? Maybe not the mass, but.
Yes, but I'm not in a hurry. Like I would like to, but I don't really want to. It's not obvious to me how to do that. So it's something that I might experiment with more. But I'm not, like I don't want to tell stories, and immediately as soon as you have two people, you know, it's psychodramatically very complicated. And so I want the two people to be the viewer and the represented person. So it's already two, you know? Then it gets complicated if there's three.
Yeah, you talked about formal issues, and like I can see there's a lot of technique involved, and I was wondering if you feel like you got a lot of that type of learning happened in your undergrad or graduate studies, or do you feel like that's stuff that you did a lot on your own, or both?
I had a very traditional training at my undergraduate. I painted essentially for 4 years just from life. So I use all that information and all that training, and what was the question?
Yeah, I guess I was just wondering where you got it, and if you hadn't had it from school, if you developed it more.
I got it in school, and I submitted myself to a rigorous program of, I'm very, like, I only need a little bit, and I can go a long time on that. So it was enough for me to do that, even though, you know, other people did lots of different things. And I was like, I just want to learn how to do this, how to see color, and how to use the material. And so I was very narrow in my focus. But you know, having said that, like I still feel like I can't paint. I still feel like I don't have the skills.
So you could go on forever with painting.
Oh yeah, it's always challenging. It's never easy. It always feels like I can't do it. It's like it's too hard.
And your abstraction that you did when you finished your studies, you did a lot of abstraction. You said for 10 years.
Yeah, I graduated in '87, and then the first things I showed you were '97. So in that time period, I was working on a very small scale with abstraction and making installations with multiple panels and floating them together. And yeah, they were minimal images, but abstract. It was about language and form and yeah.
Are there any other questions? Yeah?
Yeah, did you start making abstract work at Yale? Or how did that, you know, like, what were you up to in your grad studies?
When I went to grad school, I stopped doing what I was doing, which was painting from observation. And actually, yeah. And I started trying to understand what abstraction was. I thought, like, if you're going to be a painter, you have to understand what abstraction is. And I floundered around for like my entire 2-year program in the grad school, not being able to really figure out how you could make an image that was, abstract. And then after I graduated, I continued trying to figure that out. Nothing got sorted out while I was in grad school. And yeah, and then, so, yeah, that was my grad school experience. It's pretty confusing.
Do you ever think you'll abandon portraiture and like just go into something totally different, or are you always going to do the portrait thing?
I don't know, actually. Right now I have things in my studio that are not portraits. I have lots of work I didn't show that are, you know, sidebars or, you know, closet things that I haven't shown, and I would like to show them, you know, at some point. So I'm not sure how it's going to evolve, but yeah, I'm not sure. I like the idea in some ways of doing portraits that aren't people, like of other kinds of things. I think that could be interesting, but I'm still pretty tied to the portrait.
Are the animal heads supposed to be beautiful?
Not necessarily. No. Why?
I don't know, like to go along with the whole blonde is beautiful and like that like line of thinking.
Well, that rabbit head that you see there, he's a little bit scary actually. He's not beautiful. And there's a kind of slightly passive aggressive kind of quality to that character.
Cool. Are they cats too?
The cats I just have empathy for. Yes.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your conception of the theme of beauty, because it clearly seems to be something that's carried through all your different kind of periods, and you kind of come at it from different perspectives, like your earlier stuff, looking at those side characters, and then going kind of head on with like the magazines and stuff. I'd just be curious.
I think that beauty is complicated, and things that things that seem ugly could also be beautiful, and I think that's what I find more maybe resonant sometimes than something that is simply seductive or beautiful. But at the same time, I'm aware or sensitive to the power of things that are more purely beautiful, and I'm restless with things that seem too easy or too pretty or too sweet, like they upset me, because I think that's my natural tendency is I always make things that are too sweet, and then it's troubling, and I try to counteract it because I think it's too girly. It's pretty complicated, but it's interesting, and for me, like, painting itself is really seductive, and color and is one of the things that I'm really drawn. It's so powerful. So yeah, I'm sort of playing with it, playing against it, playing with it, playing against it, trying to have it function in a way that's interesting as well as beautiful, let's say, whatever that means. There was another question back there somewhere. Maybe I answered it.
Are there any more questions?
Thank you so much for coming.